zur neuen Ausgabe von Crop FM. Mein heutiger Telefongast ist Tom Greeves und es geht um das Three Hares Project. Ja, und wie immer gibt es natürlich den Cropcom, jener Live-Chat, mit dem sich Zuhörer dieser Sendung live am Gespräch beteiligen können. Erreichbar wie immer unter der Website-Adresse von Crop FM, cropfm.mur.at und dann auf Cropcom klicken. Ja, und einige haben sich ja schon eingefunden. Tom, Sam, Python, hallo, bis bald. They say, and your man drop that pen, blue to your bathroom utilities, better man drop that pen. Bei mir zu Gast heute ist Tom Greeves, er ist Historiker und Archäologe. Hi Tom.
Hello Tarek.
Hi. Und der Rest des Interviews ist in English, so I just said the rest of the interview will be in English, don't worry.
That's okay.
Well, welcome to my show. Very glad to have you on. It's an honor because the story, I read about it about half a year ago and I brought it in the news in Crop FM, so probably some of my listeners are already familiar with it. But a very fascinating subject. Maybe can you tell us something about your background before we dive into the Three Hares?
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I was trained as a prehistorian, that is, I studied European prehistory at Edinburgh University, and now I work independently as an archaeologist and historian and environmentalist in the southwest of England. And it was in the 1980s that I decided that this particular symbol of the three hares, which occurs in some Devon churches, that it needed investigating further. And that was the start of what's led on to the Three Hares Project and my whole research into the motif.
So you were fascinated by the motif right away, or?
I was. I thought it was so beautiful. It's such an extraordinary symbol. Maybe I should describe it.
Yeah, I mean, I have for everyone who wants to look at it, there is a link up on my website, right at the start page now, and in the past shows section later, that shows an ancient German hunting symbol from East Germany, and so people can have a look at it. But please do describe it.
Yes. You have to imagine three hares or three rabbits. It doesn't actually matter, I think, whether they're hares or rabbits, but we can discuss that later. Anyway, three of these animals following each other in a circle, so one behind the other, and you see them in profile. And the clever thing about the whole design is that each animal has two ears. And yet, in the center of the design, there are only three ears. And these three form a triangle. And the clever thing is that although there are only three ears, each animal has two.
So they are sharing ears.
Beautifully clever design.
Yeah, ear sharing.
Yeah.
All right, and they And of course, I also linked up your website, so anyone who wants to take a look at the countless images that you took in Dartmoor, I think, is that correct?
Yes, there are quite a lot on from Dartmoor, which is in Devon, and other Devon churches. We know of 17 churches in Devon which have this medieval symbol surviving, and it survives in the roof of the church as what we call a boss, which is the intersection of the timbers, or where timbers join in the roof. The join is covered by this wooden carved emblem, and that's known as a boss.
Okay, so and you and two colleagues, you founded the Three Hares Project. Can you tell us a bit more about this project?
Yes, about 4 or 5 years ago, I formed with a photographer called Chapman, who's a documentary photographer who's worked in southwest England especially, and I've known him for many years. I joined with him and also an art historian called Sue Andrew, and she's a superb researcher at finding things. And we decided to form this project to really investigate this symbol further. And so one of the first things we did was to document all the examples of the motif in Devon. And then we put on an exhibition which excited some attention in England, in southwest England. And then we went on to look at all the other examples we knew in England and in Wales as well. So we had a week-long trip that that enabled us to photograph and document all the examples we knew of in England. And I also, with my wife, 4 or 5 years ago, did a preliminary visit to France and Germany, where we knew there were some other examples. My wife came on a slightly curious holiday with me, where we were searching after three hares. So we did some important groundwork then. And then in March of this year, we actually had 8 days in Germany and France. That is, I and my two colleagues. And we also then, in August of this year, we were invited to a conference in China, which is the eastern end of our quest. And I can tell you more about that later. But we've traveled over quite a bit of Western Europe, or Germany and France, and we've seen things in China, and we've covered a lot in Britain. But there's a lot more to the story than just that.
Yeah, I mean, let's start off maybe with what are all the... You discovered numerous places all around the world, and that's actually why I was very fascinated by the subject right from the beginning, apart from that it is a very eerie and very interesting symbol. But you found occurrences of this symbol all over the world. Can you sum up, or can you tell us where...
Yeah. This is the extraordinary thing. We knew of the examples in Devon in southwest England, and 15 years ago I was coming out of a church in Devon, and with Chris Chapman, the photographer, and we met a friend of his, and we talked about what we were doing, and he said, "Oh, I know where that symbol occurs, in a Buddhist context in China." And he was the first person to alert me to the fact that exactly the same symbol occurs thousands of miles away in China. Now, the Chinese examples are the earliest ones we know of and date to about AD 600. The Devon ones date to the 15th century AD, or maybe a little earlier. Now, as a result of our searches, we found a distribution right across Western Europe and right across Eurasia, so in Iran, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, in the Himalayan region, and then in this area in China, which is on the southwest edge of the Gobi Desert, about 1,000 miles west of Beijing. So this was the extraordinary thing. No one seemed to have appreciated that this particular symbol was occurring right across this huge spread of the old world. And it's in many different cultures and in 4 key religions. So we now know it in Buddhism, in Islamic contexts, in Jewish contexts, and in Christian contexts, and all within the medieval period. In other words, from AD 600 to 1500, that sort of date range.
Yeah. Now, where do you think that this symbol originated?
Where do we think it originated? Well, we don't know.
You don't know? Okay.
What we can say is that the Chinese, and also we believe, as do the Chinese, that the examples in China, although they are the earliest we know, they did not originate in China. And the Chinese believe that they came from what is now broadly known as Persia, or the Persian area. In other words, Iran, Iraq area, and a little bit further north, perhaps. The designs in the caves associated with the symbol in China seem to have their influence from this Persian area in the first millennium AD. And there was an important empire that was very influential in artistic and religious ideas called the Sasanian Empire. And that is thought to have been the influence on the Chinese examples, possibly spread by traders who were operating in, or whose base was in, the sort of Turkmenistan area, and they were known as Sogdian traders, and they were traveling to and fro along what we now know as the Silk Road. And so at the moment we think the origins may lie in Persia, but we could be proved, well, not exactly wrong, but we could prove that eventually we may find an origin even further west, say in the Hellenistic world, in Egyptian area possibly, but we have none earlier than the Chinese examples so far.
And how old are these examples? They are...
The Chinese ones are about 1,400 years old.
1,400 years.
Yeah.
But you would not be too surprised if you find older examples?
We wouldn't, no. And that's the challenge. one of many challenges to try and resolve this. I mean, what's so extraordinary is this crossing over of religions and cultures, because today we are sort of fed the impression that all these religions were always fighting each other, and these different peoples, and yet here is a symbol that was clearly borrowed from one religion or one culture to another and treated as a sacred symbol. That's one of the aspects of it that particularly interests us, that it has a sacred dimension.
Is it mentioned in any scripture? So, I mean, do you have any idea what? I mean, I'm sure we get there later. But do you have any mentioning of it in some literature or anything?
This is our problem. We don't have any contemporary description from the medieval world of what it meant in any of these religions or cultures. So we hope there will be a breakthrough, that someone will find a Buddhist scroll with a description in it. All we can say is that knowledge of the symbol had been lost certainly by 1700, certainly in Britain and probably on the continent of Europe as well. But this is one of the mysteries, is what does it mean, or what could it have meant in these different religions?
See, that's what I don't get. I mean, you have this symbol which occurs in churches at very prominent places, correct?
That is, yeah, that's correct.
And no one knows what it is. I mean, when you look at the church and you see all those symbols, I mean, to all of those symbols, there's a special meaning. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in the church. And yet you have this really very bizarre symbol and no idea what it's meaning.
No, it's rather exciting, isn't it? Because it makes us wonder how many other symbols we have missed, or we don't understand what the meaning is. What else is there? Because, as you say, these are given prominence. In the caves in China, the symbol is absolutely in the center of these elaborate painted caves, which I can describe later on. But obviously given great importance in terms of the design of these sacred caves. In the Christian context, it's often in the holiest part of the church, at the east end, in the roof at the east end of the church, for example. And in Islamic contexts, we have at the moment a very interesting example that was on a coin that was minted by the Mongol Empire in Iran at the end of the 13th century. And in order to put a symbol like that on one side of a coin, it must have had great significance. It must have meant something to the people.
Yeah.
And then in a Jewish context, we've recently heard of a Hebrew Bible of the early 14th century that has the same design incorporated into it. So, yeah, it's amazing.
Now, since its earliest occurrences are in China, have you had the chance to do... Now, you visited China. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Shall I describe
please.
the place?
Yeah.
I mean, this is an amazing place. As I said, it's about 1,000 miles west of Beijing. It's on the southwestern edge of the Gobi Desert. It's a place called Dunhuang, and near Dunhuang, about 25 kilometers from Dunhuang, is a collection of caves which are all artificial. They've been dug out of a cliff face, which is on the edge of a river that at this time of year is completely dry, but in the springtime will have snowmelt water running through it. And it's an oasis, a little oasis on one of the great trading routes known as the Silk Road. And these caves extend over a 2-kilometer stretch of the river, and they are 3 stories high sometimes 3 stories of these caves, and about 500 caves have been dug out of the cliff over a 1,000-year period. And most of these caves are beautifully painted and decorated. So what happened was, I should say they are also Buddhist caves. They're all Buddhist caves. And they dug the caves out of the rock. It's quite an easy rock to dig. It's a very sort of pebbly mix, so they could dig it out relatively easily. Then they plastered the wall with mud and straw, and then they put on a finer layer of plaster, and then they painted every surface of the walls and the ceilings in beautiful colors and with elaborate scenes of the Buddha's life and other aspects, all sorts of things. And you have to imagine these caves, they vary in size. Some are just big enough for a monk to sit in and pray in, not much bigger than for one person to sit inside. But others are as big as a church. And every surface is covered with these paintings. And they also have in the center of these caves, they often have a statue of the Buddha and the Buddha's disciples and so on. The symbol of the 3 hares is right in the apex, the very top of the cave, top of the roof. So your eye is taken up to the very center. So that seems to have given it significance. And the center of the cave is painted to represent a textile canopy, a bit like a tent, but it's really a covering or canopy with tassels hanging down round the edge of it. A bit like if you see pictures of emperors with some servants standing behind them holding over their head a textile canopy of some sort. It looks a bit like that. And at the moment, we know of 17 caves out of the 500 odd, which still have this symbol of the three hares in it.
And when you talk to, I guess you talk to the people there, how long have you been in China?
We spent 5 days at this place, Mogao, which is where the caves are, and we talked to people there. We also had an opportunity to talk to a scholar who'd worked all his life at an institute that looks after the caves, and we talked to him in a city called Lanzhou, and he was very interesting. He was absolutely confident that the earliest examples in these caves were sacred, that the whole decoration of the caves had a sacred element to it. He was also convinced that the symbol wasn't indigenous to China, that it came from Persia. He was quite confident about that. He actually suggested that it might have traveled from Persia to eastern China, to the sort of heart of the Han Empire, and then moved out westwards to these caves later. But he couldn't give us examples from the Han area. So we're still left with the caves being the earliest known example.
And did this gentleman have any knowledge of mentioning of this symbol in scripture? Or
No, he didn't know of anything. Now, it's his. We are quite hopeful that something will turn up, because these caves at Dunhuang are famous for a collection of Buddhist scrolls that were discovered in what has become known as the Library Cave about 100 years ago. And most of these scrolls, which numbered about 50,000 that were discovered, they've been dispersed to the British Library in London, to Berlin, to Paris, to Beijing, and so on. And many of them have never been read or studied in great detail yet by scholars. But there is a new impetus to work on these scrolls. So we're hoping someone will find something that will describe what this symbol means and what its particular Buddhist significance is.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, and the gentleman you talked to, I mean, are those caves still in use? Are they still churches?
No, they're not. No, they're just a cultural site, sort of heritage site, and they
like
have
Stonehenge.
A lot of visitors every year. About 300,000 visitors, I think, visit them. So it's quite a big complex. But there's also this Dunhuang Institute, which is based by the caves, which does conservation work and research in relation to the caves. I mean, the place is one of the wonders of the world. There's no doubt about it, because the age of it is so extraordinary, and the state of preservation of the colors is wonderful because of the desert conditions, the arid conditions.
I see. And the gentleman mentioned to you that he thinks the symbol originated from Persia.
Yes.
Why did he suggest that? What was his...
He suggests that because the style of decoration associated with the symbol in the caves is clearly of Sasanian origin. In other words, it is derived from this Sasanian Empire, which was based in Persia in the first millennium, the early first millennium AD. So the influence of the design is clearly from that source.
Mm-hmm. Now, where else have you found occurrences? You found, I think, on your website there are images from an old, an old chest where the symbol is engraved. Is that correct?
Yes, that was very interesting. That was something we saw this year in March in Trier, in western Germany, on the Moselle. This beautiful old Roman city and this wonderful cathedral which incorporates the remains of a Roman basilica in it. But in the treasury of this cathedral, this Christian cathedral, they have a beautiful reliquary, which is a bejeweled chest, little box really, which in the 17th century was said to contain the head of, or part of the head of St. Lazarus, but it's empty now. Anyway, the craftsmanship on this little chest, this little box, is absolutely wonderful. It's silver, but with gold filigree work, and the top of the reliquary and its sides are all of this same filigree work, but the base plate, the underneath of it, seems quite different because it has an Islamic design with a lot of with some animals, including sphinxes and beautiful sort of swirling Islamic motifs, but also our three hares are there. And this was very striking to us. We thought this is an amazing juxtaposition of the Islamic world with the Christian world, and dating back to about 1200 AD, so 800 years old.
Yeah.
We've since learned that the craftsmanship and the design comes from a South Russian school of craftsmanship, and this is linked with the Mongol Empire, which we think was one of the main influences in spreading the motif to the west from the east, from China and other parts of the east, because the Mongol Empire when it was at its peak, for about 100 years, from the mid-13th century to the mid-14th century, plus or minus 50 years either way, it was very stable, but it was a huge empire, in fact the largest empire that's ever been known, the land empire that's ever been known, and it extended from Poland in the west all the way to Vietnam in the east. And for more than 100 years, or about 100 years, it was so stable that you could travel very safely across this vast expanse of territory. And the Mongols were particularly interested in the craftsmen of the various peoples that they took control of. And they used to move craftsmen from one place to another and encourage their work. And this reliquary in Trier Cathedral seems to come from one of these South Russian schools of craftsmanship that presumably was established by the Mongols.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely fascinating. So, a listener asks in the chat, we have a live chat running here, whether the symbol also appears in Germany, and you just answered the question, yes, in Trier you saw this chest, yeah?
That's only one example in Germany. We actually have quite a few in Germany. Mm-hmm. In fact, if you take a sort of north-south line from Münster in the north, right down to Basel in Switzerland in the south, and if you include a little bit of eastern France, the Alsace region and the Vosges region of France, that is the area that we found several examples. Perhaps one of the most exciting examples in Germany is right in the middle of Germany, a little tiny hamlet called Kloster Heine. Well, it's a village. It's bigger than a hamlet. And it's the site of a Cistercian abbey that's now a psychiatric hospital. But they have a bell there that was presented to the abbey by the Archbishop of Mainz in 1224, 1224, so nearly 800 years ago. And this bell is still there, and cast onto the bell is the symbol of the three hares. And also on the bell are the Greek letters Alpha and Omega, which means the beginning and the end, of course. There is also an inscription around the bell that asks for God's pardon, and the sounding of the bell also asks for it. So it doesn't seem to have any particular significance relative to the three hares. And then there are also cast onto the bell some seals or crests of the Archbishop of Mainz and one of the Landgrafs of Thuringia Hesse, and also two other seals which we haven't yet deciphered. But it's amazing that this bell, which is such an important object, has the three hares on it, and yet we don't know what it meant to them.
Well, okay, I mean, if anyone listening right now knows of another occurrence of this symbol in Austria, Germany, or Swiss, then I want to ask them to send me the pictures, or anywhere on the world.
Yeah, we would be really pleased to hear of other examples.
They can send it to me, or they send it directly to you, but maybe they can CC me.
Yeah.
And I would be very glad to receive images of the three hares.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming up to a little break here now. In the break, we were talking a little bit about hares. I mean, a lot of my German listeners might not know what a hare is. I will translate it. Wahrscheinlich ist es ein Feldhase. Also es gibt also Hasen, die in Hasenbauten leben, und dann gibt es die Feldhasen, und die heißen auf Englisch hares. So hares do not live underground, you say?
The hare lives always on the surface, yeah.
I see. And now the symbol of the three hares is, of course, a very striking symbol, and that's why I think that's also so fascinating, that a symbol that special, is occurring everywhere. No one knows about it. This is just endlessly fascinating for me.
Yeah,
it's amazing. So, I mean, I know you don't really know what it is, or not yet, but I mean, you and your colleagues are doing all to find out, I guess. But what's your best guess? I mean, what does it mean?
Well, I think you have to look at the hare to start with. We have to explore the folklore and mythology of the hare, which is very, very important in many, many societies. So the hare, we start off with the hare as a special beast, a special animal. And the hare is associated with several important things that may be relevant to our quest. First, it's associated with the moon in many cultures. And this may be because hares are often seen when the moon is shining. They are nocturnal animals, well, not exclusively, but often nocturnal. And there are legends that connect the hare with the moon. Perhaps the most interesting one is the Buddhist legend, which comes from China, which tells of how Buddha was disguised as a beggar, and he was sitting under a tree, and various animals came past him and saw that he was hungry, and so they went and fetched various items of food for him, and he was very grateful. The hare then came by and saw Buddha was hungry, and what the hare did was to jump into the cooking pot of Buddha's cooking pot, and so sacrificed herself for the sake of Buddha. And Buddha was so grateful for this that he rewarded the hare by saying they could live, or she could live, in the moon. And the Chinese and other societies believe you can actually see the hare in the moon. And now I've been told that I see the hare in the moon. You have to tilt your head a little, but the shadows on the moon, the darker marks on the moon, they do actually form 2 ears of a creature and the sort of body of a creature. You can imagine that. So there is this important association with the moon. There's also a very important association of hares with Easter and spring, the Christian festival of Easter. It was in the 7th century AD that one of the great Christian writers in England, called Bede, he wrote about a Saxon goddess called Eostre, spelled Eostre, and I think there are some other possible spellings. But this is the origin of our word Easter. And this goddess had with her a hare, so she was part of the goddess's whole association, if you like. And this hare has become the well-known Easter rabbit that everyone knows, and you see chocolate examples of all over the place. So there's the hare associated with Easter, with springtime, with fertility, and all of that. It also has a very important association with witchcraft in many different societies. And in southwest England, where I live, there are traditions of witches being able to turn themselves into hares and then back again. And these are recorded from the 19th century and earlier. And so wherever you look, there are really a very, very interesting ancient tales and folklore to do with the hare. So that gives us confidence that we're looking at something important in terms of an animal. The difficulty is, why 3 of them? I think that's a great challenge.
Yeah, the number 3. I mean, it's not only the number 3, which has great significance in all religions, but it's also the triangle. So,
it is.
Yeah. Let's start with the number 3. Why do you think there are 3 hares?
Well, the simple answer is we don't know, and this is what we want to find out. But as you say, the number 3 is important in many different religions and cultures. In the Christian religion, you have the threesome of the Trinity, that is Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Now, I think you have to ask, why should a hare represent this? Why should 3 hares represent this rather than anything else? So we don't find this explanation, which several people use, say, oh yes, this symbol represents the Trinity. We don't find it sufficient as an explanation, really. We feel there must be more to it. But in Buddhism, there are various trinities as well. There's one that links, it's Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. It's the Buddha himself, Dharma, who are the monks or priesthood, and Sangha, which is the community itself. But again, without any written link with this symbol, I think it's a little bit too easy to say just because there are 3 of them that they must relate to one of these trinities in a religion. So, who knows? You could say that 3 represents birth, life and death, or whatever. But it is very, very difficult. But you're right in saying the triangle occurs again and again in several different cultures.
Yeah, the triangle. I mean, you mentioned Egypt before, and the triangle is quite prominent in Egypt, I would say.
Yes. I mean, we think the triangle formed by the ears is very important as far as the symbol is concerned, and probably its sacred status. I should perhaps say that that the symbol isn't always given a sacred status. I mean, we do know it in secular contexts, where probably the puzzle dimension of the symbol is given more importance, or the paradox of the symbol, the fact that you have three animals, each with 2 ears, yet there are only 3 ears in the design. And this certainly is a recurring approach to it in the post-medieval period, that is the 18th, 19th centuries, and probably a little bit earlier as well. But maybe some of your listeners can help us with the meaning of the triangle.
Yeah, it would be great, yeah. Now, not sure if you have ever asked yourself this question or are dealing with things or with questions like this, but have you ever found it mentioned in any secret societies, like, Masons or what have you, that often use symbologies, etc.?
Yeah.
Do those circles know more about it, maybe? Or what do you think? What's your feeling?
We haven't found that out yet. As you say, there are societies like the Masons. There are the Knights Templars.
Yeah.
They're another possible group, but we haven't come across anything that links our symbol directly with that. There is an interesting example from France, from the Vosges region. It's actually in a museum in a place called Épinal, which is the lintel of a doorway, the top stone over a door from a house, and it has our 3 hares on it, but it also has the Cross of Lorraine also carved on this stone. The Cross of Lorraine is a very distinctive symbol which has 2 bars, unlike the normal Christian cross. It actually has 2 bars across it. So that may be a secret or quasi-secret mark of some sort. The one area where we have come across it is in alchemy. So alchemical books of the late 16th century or around 1600, they actually show pictures of this symbol, and not only with the 3 hares in the middle, but with dogs running around the outside. And this design is quite a well-known design in alchemical books, is called the Hunt of Venus. But alchemy is a very obscure subject, so we haven't really decided whether it could be significant in terms of our earlier medieval ones.
You mentioned France, Germany. What other European countries have you discovered this symbol in? Did you hear of any occurrences of this symbol in Austria, for example?
Not yet. No, we haven't. We have some later examples from the Ukraine. We know some Jewish examples of the 18th and 19th century. In fact, there's one in Germany, or a part of a ceiling from a synagogue in Germany, early 18th century, in Schwäbisch Hall in southern Germany. And we've learned that several Jewish cemeteries in the Ukraine and Poland of the 18th and 19th century, the headstones also have this symbol, but we don't yet know why. We've also seen it on pottery from Slovakia, but again it's rather late in date. It's 18th century, and so by that time we feel it was the design that inspired artists and craftsmen more than its original sacred significance. So we are interested in collecting any instance of it, but for the moment we think it's the symbols that we can confidently date before 1500, say, so that are more than 500 years old, that they will give us a particular insight eventually.
Yeah.
We've also found it on some manuscripts, some painted or illuminated manuscripts of the medieval period from England, in collections in England, and we've also found it on tiles, medieval tiles, from, there's one from Constance, right in the south, and there are some from England as well. So there are all sorts of possibilities where it may turn up.
Have you ever heard of any occurrence in Iraq?
In Iraq?
Yeah.
Well, almost.
Almost.
This Mongol coin that I mentioned, it was minted in a town called Urmia in 1281, and that is now, I believe, just in Iran. It's right it's sort of in the Kurdish area, in the extreme northern part of Iran. But we haven't got a definite example from Iraq, but we've got several other Iranian examples that are on metal trays that are beautifully decorated, circular trays, again of around 1200. There are quite a lot of examples that seem to home in around that period, the sort of late 12th and right through the 13th century. And we think there may be a link not only with the Mongols and the stability and the possibilities of trade then, but anyone who knows their history will know that in 1204 the Crusaders captured Constantinople, now known as Istanbul, of course. And the capture of the great city of Constantinople released a huge amount of artistic influence, or art objects and craft objects, into the West European and North European world. So that could have been one of the main influences.
Okay, I mean, we're coming towards the end of we still have about 20 minutes to go. I would like to move on to the question. I mean, obviously you don't know the answers, but of course you give it a lot of thought. So what's your best shot on where did it come from? What do you think?
And the meaning of it.
The meaning of it, and where did it come from? Yeah.
Well, I mean, as far as where it came from, we are quite happy to accept the Chinese scholars' view and other scholars' view that the influence is from Persia, or in other words, the Iranian area as we know it now. So that's as far back as we can go for its origin. But we may find, as I say, that the origin even goes further back and possibly to the Hellenistic world of the Mediterranean. The meaning, as far as the meaning is concerned, we feel it is a positive sign. It seems to have that sort of good quality to it. We also feel it's likely to be a feminine or female sign. It seems because of these links with fertility and so on. And so we also think the link with the moon is probably significant. But it's very, very, very difficult. I mean, that's one of the exciting things, is that we don't yet know the answers. And, of course, that this symbol has remained hidden for so many centuries that a few people knew of the examples in England, or rather in Devon. Other people knew of a cluster in eastern France, and some other people knew a little cluster in Germany. But nobody realized there were these links, and also this amazing connection with China.
So you were the first one to point out that this symbol is actually globally spread.
We think so, yes. We think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and which is nice because, as I said near the beginning, it makes us wonder what else we haven't realized, or recognized.
Oh yeah, but it's exciting enough on its own. I mean,
yeah, of course. Yes, we're kept quite busy with
this. Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
I mean, so have you? I mean, it seems to be a very not too easy to find out more about it. So, have you ever turned to people like psychics who might be able to tell you where it came from? I know you always have to, be careful with statements that come from beyond or whatever. But have you ever tried this or thought about doing this?
We haven't. Well, we haven't either tried it or thought about it, I have to say. But that wouldn't mean that we would rule it out. We are very interested in hearing from anyone who feels they can make a contribution, because there is no... Well, when we started our project, we had no place to go to find out information except just searching ourselves in particular areas, or asking people to just be aware of the possibility of finding it. So we are dependent on people all over the world, in fact, who send us information. We have some wonderful contacts, but we're quite sure there is more information to be found.
Yeah, well, maybe some of my listeners who know someone who knows someone that could help us.
Yeah,
help you.
Perhaps for many of your listeners, they aren't aware of this symbol. But in Germany, perhaps the best known is at Paderborn Cathedral in Nordrhein-Westfalen. Mm-hmm. That in the cloister of the cathedral, one of the windows has in stone this design carved on it, and that has been known for many years and sort of recognized as a special design. So if people are wondering, well, where can I see this and how do I get to see one of these, Paderborn Cathedral is certainly a good start, probably, if you're in that area. But we know of, as I say, we now know of quite an interesting spread right through Germany and eastern France.
Are there any? I mean, the number of occurrences, is it anywhere extremely dense? Are there a lot? Is there an area on the globe where you think this symbol occurs most?
There seem to be these clusters.
Yeah.
We have in Devon, in England, we have 17 medieval churches which still have surviving in their roofs one or more of these wooden bosses. So, and they're beautifully carved. As on your website, you can see, or our website, you can see the images.
Which is linked up from the start page, so anyone who wants to have a look.
So, so there's definitely a cluster in southwest England, which is not repeated anywhere else in England or Wales. We then have the Chinese group. We now know 17 caves, which is rather nice coincidence that there are 17 caves and 17 churches. And then there seems to be another cluster in Alsace in eastern France, which you can extend a little further to include part of the Vosges region, a little bit further to the southwest from Alsace. So there's a little cluster there. There are several churches there that have the symbol. In Alsace, one of the best examples is at a place called Wissembourg, or Weissenburg, I think in German, or Weissenburg in German, but Wissembourg in French. And there is a lovely church, which was a Benedictine, the church of a Benedictine abbey. And there they have, in the chapter house there, which was the place where the monks met, carved in stone in the roof, one of these bosses with the three hares. So that's a particularly lovely example. So we've got that cluster there, but otherwise we haven't got a concentrated group as you've got in Devon, eastern France and in China. So those at the moment are the three main groupings.
Mm-hmm. What are your plans for the future? What do you think that this journey will lead you? Where this journey will lead you?
Well, that's an unknown, really. But we still feel there's a lot of information out there, and we are hoping to document as many examples as possible. We hope to travel more in France and Germany within the next year or two to actually photograph the known examples. But we're confident that we will find out more from libraries, manuscripts, the study of these Buddhist scrolls and so on. And our great hope is that we will eventually find a contemporary reference that says, well, this symbol means such and such. But maybe we won't. Who knows? But it's
maybe you find more than one.
is exciting.
Yeah. Maybe you find more than one, you know.
More than one, yes.
Well, one telling you, well, that's this and that. The next one telling you something different.
Well, for me personally, although the symbol is so ancient, it seems to me to have a modern resonance. The way in which it crosses over between these religions and cultures, it's just a beautiful symbol for our own time. It's an ancient archetype is the word to describe it, but I think if maybe we could just become more aware of it, linking us across all these thousands of kilometers and thousands of years, possibly, certainly hundreds of years, which puts us in touch with other peoples and other places in a most exciting way.
Yeah. Again, what is really fascinating about this symbol is it's not like a cross or a simple geometric symbol. It is a very complicated thing. And yet it's spread all over the world and no one knows what it is. So it's the fact that it is not just a geometrical thing, but actually rather complicated thing makes it even more interesting. I mean, it's for me at least.
I agree with that absolutely. And then to realize that it was given this sacred status, such importance as well in these caves and the churches and so on, and on a Mongol coin. It gives us it's really really thrilling to think that a medieval Buddhist monk, or a medieval Jew, or a Mongol, someone from the Mongol Empire, could, if they had been able to, if they travelled to a medieval church in Devon 800 years or so ago, or 500 years ago, I should say, they could have looked it up in the roof and seen this symbol, and it would have meant something to each of them. And they would have interpreted it in terms of their own culture and religion. That's just wonderful. It's like, well, no, I would say what I was going to say. It was too banal. Anyway, it's wonderful.
I have this feeling something is wrong with this picture. No pun intended. Because when I first saw it, when I first read your story, honestly, I thought, that must be a joke from Time Travelers.
Time Travelers. Oh, well, we haven't considered that yet.
No, not really seriously, but could it be that someone doesn't want us to find out what it is? I mean, it isn't to find no reference about it. Could it be that someone? Have you ever thought along these lines that it's maybe a secret symbol?
Yeah, I mean, you may well be right, and that we will never know. But that still doesn't. I don't know when we'd ever be sure that was the case.
Yeah, you'd never be sure. So
no, you'd never be sure. But the quest could still keep going, I think.
It would be a self-feeding conspiracy theory, like many others.
Yeah. I mean, probably your listeners have noticed that in some of if they've had a chance to look at Chris Chapman's website, the link website, that in some instances the hairs
which is linked
go
up from
clockwise and sometimes round the other way. And we don't yet know whether there's any significance in that. It's interesting in the Buddhist caves in China, out of the 17 examples, only one of them goes anti-clockwise. And that is against all Buddhist principles of direction. Because if in Buddhism you always go clockwise, if you're turning a prayer wheel or going round a temple or whatever. So it's curious to find in the center of this cave design, in the center of the roof, one going the other way. So there may be significance, or it may be just coincidence, or it may be that the artist was left-handed or something. we don't know, but there are many interesting aspects of it that we can explore for the future. And it's every time we come across one of these really ancient examples, they are so beautiful. And I mean, even the modern examples, many modern craftsmen and artists, craftspeople and artists reproduce this design in their own particular way on pottery or in paint or whatever. And every time it just has a new life of its own, I think.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Yeah. So the story continues. You will not give up searching until you find out, or
well, we're certainly going to keep going a bit longer. We feel we've just started, really.
Yeah.
Although it's wonderful to have been to the eastern end, or what we think is the eastern end, the Chinese end, and also to have started at the western end, our southwest English examples, and to try and fill in the space between.
Will you go back to China?
We would like to, very much, to see the caves again, because we would love to go there and have a chance to take photographs, because they don't allow at the moment people other than Chinese photographers to take photographs inside the caves. But we hope that we may get around that obstacle at some stage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you so much for coming on my show. It was a great pleasure to have you, and it was very fascinating, for me at least, and I hope for most of my listeners as well.
Well, thank you, Tarek, for inviting me.
Yeah, and I hope we can repeat that sometime in the future, because I would like to keep updated on the latest developments, because I guess the Three Hares will be with you for the rest of your life.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you very much, and talk to you again.
Thank you, Tarek. Bye.
Okay, bye. Ja, das war also Tom Greeves und die drei Hasen, ja, also, weiß nicht, mir geht es jedenfalls so eine absolut faszinierende Story. 3 Hasen, die auf der ganzen Welt auftauchen und keiner weiß warum. Es ist unwirklich. Ja, und ich hoffe, der Herr wird wirklich wieder mal bei mir zu Gast sein und wir werden dem Ganzen vielleicht schon etwas näher gekommen sein, der Lösung des Rätsels nämlich. Ja, also die Website-Adresse von Tom Greeves ist ja wie gesagt von der Startseite aus verlinkt. Ab morgen oder dann ab morgen in der Past Show-Sektion. Und wenn also irgendjemand dieses Symbol irgendwo sieht oder entdeckt zufällig, dann bitte schickt mir Bilder. Das wäre toll. Also von Chemtrails habe ich sehr viele Bilder schon und es ist auch super, aber ja, also schickt mir auch Bilder von Hasen. Das wäre toll. Von 3 nämlich. Ja, die nächste Sendung Crop FM findet am 26. November statt und freue mich schon sehr darauf. Ich bedanke mich bei allen fürs Zuhören. Macht es gut.